Hello, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Isis and this is Isis Says Hi. So I did a whole bunch of research for this video. The Supreme Court ruled in a unanimous decision that states may replace or even punish faithless electors, and I'll put up the definition right here. So essentially, kind of looks like the Supreme Court is allowing states, even if they don't have a rule for faithless electors, to actually penalize them. This case comes from the 2016 election, when some electors from Colorado and Washington state had decided to not elect Hillary Clinton because they were Democratic electors, but they actually decided to go with John Kasich or Colin Powell, two people who I do not even remember being candidates for the presidential election. But anyways, Justice Elena Kagan, I'm gonna say, wrote that according to the Constitution's plain language, each state appoints its electors in such a manner as the legislature thereof may direct. The power includes power to condition his appointment, that is to say, what the elector must do for the appointment to take effect. None of that made sense. And I wrote it down and it doesn't make a whole bunch of sense. I think essentially what it is that if a state, particularly if a party in the state is appointing these electors, they're appointing them because they are loyal to the party and they can trust them that when they go to vote for the president, that they are actually voting based and depending on that party's person that they have picked. So when that doesn't happen, they're called a faithless elector. Kagan's opinion noted that when the Electoral College system was created, they failed to anticipate growth of political parties, which is kind of funny because I think when they went to their second presidential election, that is when the split of electors happened. I'm gonna give some background into the Electoral College. What is in my hair? Okay. If you're watching this and you like this, feel free to add any kind of extra tidbits or things down below. I'm sure I haven't looked up everything, so feel free to add it and I'll maybe add those amendments, obviously after fact checking them, sorry y'all. I'll add those amendments in the next video because I think it's important to always follow up on things that you do. So although many Americans believe that they actually elect the president and the vice president, they actually don't do that. It's actually the Electoral College that does that. And the system is usually it's supposed to be considered as a formality because usually the person who wins the Electoral College usually also wins the popular vote. And I hope if you've been following along in elections, you know that that hasn't been true for a good chunk of them. What I think most people don't know is that the system was actually created at the last minute at the 1787 Constitutional Convention. The main argument for an electoral college was that big cities would override the votes of smaller rural towns, that the rural towns would no longer be considered in the vote. The more historically accurate reasoning was that some of the framers were afraid that people who lived in rural towns and weren't close enough to getting information as quickly would actually make an uninformed vote. While they did worry about bigger cities kind of invalidating the rural towns and their voters, they had kind of a resolution for that. If the election was deadlocked, then it would just be sent to the House of Representatives, where each state, big or small, would just get one single vote, which that's not a good idea. So national political parties developed within a few years of the Constitution's ratification, and electors quickly joined one team or the other. Justice Joseph Story at the time wrote that any elector's effort to exercise independent judgment would be treated as a political usurpation, dishonorable to the individual, and a fraud upon his constituents. It became so heavily partisan that trying to make your own independent vote and judgment essentially meant that you didn't care about the people who you were representing. And then you would just be politically usurped, which is kind of what happens now anyways. Today, 32 states, including and the District of Columbia, so awkward that it's not a state, anyways, require electors to pledge to vote for a specific candidate, and about half of those states also penalize or replace faithless electors. Even in states without such laws, faithless electors are incredibly rare, and for a simple reason: they were chosen precisely because of their party loyalty, and so they would want to vote for their party's candidate. So why should we abolish the Electoral College? This is me as an aside. The Supreme Court essentially ruling that you can punish or replace electors, faithless electors, kind of does essentially invalidate the Electoral College. You basically have just deduced their power to the popular vote. But we're gonna go into a little bit more research history, which I love. Some argue that the Electoral College undermines the principle of one person, one vote, which was affirmed in 1964 by the Supreme Court in Reynolds versus Sims, which was a key part of the civil and voting rights revolution. The 60s were always that like wild law revolution time, especially when you're getting into like the mid 60s. My favorite time to research ish. Here, we're gonna stop. Even if big city voters were to cast every single one of their ballots for one candidate, the nation's 100 biggest cities only hold just under 20% of Americans. If you think about rural America as a set of states, the Electoral College does give voters in Iowa or Montana or Wyoming a sizable say in the election of the president. But if you are conceiving it as a population of voters, then that picture is different. I think the way that the Electoral College has been looked at is not as this state is declaring that this is their candidate based off of who the people have voted for. It's more conceived as this is the number, to me, it's more conceived as this is the number of people who are in our state. So when you divide that, do some math, these are the electors. Based off of that, that's how we're voting. Did that make any sense at all? You can see what's population voting is different. It's true. If you think about it in states always obviously very different. So this state decided that this candidate's better. I don't know if any of that made sense. I might not include that. Roughly 60 million Americans live in rural counties, and they aren't all concentrated in rural states. Millions live in large and mid-sized states like California, New York, Illinois, Alabama, and South Carolina. Rural interests would be represented from coast to coast, as opposed to a system that only weighs those who live in swing states. Sam Wang is a molecular biologist at Princeton who runs an election website. He found, I'll insert it probably here somewhere, that out of almost 400 campaign stops made after the conventions, neither Hillary Clinton nor Donald Trump had actually made appearances in states that were reliably red or blue. So they made it in swing states. Candidates are not going to go to every state. They're going to go to the swing states that aren't reliably red or blue, because we're not looking at the Electoral College as a state representation. We're looking at it as a population of voters. If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Makes sense in my head. I could be very wrong. Let me know. In modern politics, intrastate political differences are as important as interstate ones. A national campaign would probably follow suit, with candidates looking for connections between regions, cities, metropolitan areas, versus a singular focus on a few states. So how does the Electoral College play out in elections? When margins between candidates are large, the Electoral College usually aligns with the national popular vote, but narrow margins can throw it into chaos. Now we're going to talk about the elections that threw it into chaos. The 1968 presidential election nearly went to the House of Representatives. In 1976, if you move roughly 6,000 ballots from Jimmy Carter in Ohio and roughly 18,000 in Wisconsin, Gerald Ford becomes president. Without the Electoral College, neither Trump nor his Republican predecessor, George W. Bush, would have won the White House on their first go-around. The fact that at least 2 Electoral College blunders occurred just in under the past 20 years has provoked a lot of suggestions for reform, including getting rid of the Electoral College altogether. In 1966, late Senator Birch Bayh of Indiana introduced a constitutional amendment to elect the president by national popular vote. In 1968, Bayh spoke before, I hope I'm saying his last name correctly. I feel like that's not right. Before a committee of Congress in support of his amendment. We are living in a dangerous world where the stability of the United States is one of the most important things facing us. Ellipses. When we have an electoral college system which threatens to elect a man who has fewer votes than his opponent, We tend to erode the confidence in the people of this country, in their president, and their form of government. James Michener, an author who served as a presidential elector in 1968, was a bit more blunter. He called the Electoral College a ticking time bomb lodged near the heart of the nation. Recently, at a CNN town hall in Jackson, Mississippi, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts called for shutting down the Electoral College. She says, she quotes, I quote, but she says, I believe we need a constitutional amendment that protects the right to vote for every American citizen and to make sure that vote gets counted. So what are the chances of the Electoral College actually being abolished, at least right now? So the country is pretty polarized and pretty partisan today. It seems pretty unlikely for the Electoral College to constitutionally be abolished. It would require a constitutional amendment, and that requires 2/3 a vote in both houses of Congress and approval by 3/4 of the states. In response to that, and knowing that that might not happen, at least for a bit, several states have signed onto a proposal to sidestep the Electoral College altogether by joining a national popular vote interstate compact to pledge their Electoral College votes to whichever candidate wins the national popular vote, regardless of how the candidate performs in their state. So far, the compact has the support of 15 states and the District of Columbia, making up 196 electoral votes of the 270 that's needed to win the White House. So the compact will go into effect once enough states have joined to tip the election, which could be challenged in court. The chances of that completely working and going through are a little bit iffy. Alright. Of course my hair literally goes out close to the end of the video. So that is all from me. Thank you for watching and listening to me ramble about the Electoral College. I'd love to know any kind of historical anecdotes you have that I might not have mentioned. Let me know, because I feel like I could do as much research as I would like to do, but I might not be doing it very well. I'm gonna leave all of my sources and articles that I've read down below. Please let me know your opinions down below. If there are any things that you would like to, any corrections, any things you would like to kind of drop down below, let me know. See you guys later. Folks, see you folks later. I need to be better at that. Goodbye.